The Bucs are finally getting healthier with even more help on the way.
And the New Orleans Saints are just trying to figure out who in their roster is a part of their future.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into a crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. We want to thank you for making Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, host of Locked On Bucs. He is Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson NOLA, host of Locked On Saints. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, we have the key matchups. We have keys to victory. All of that is coming up in a little bit. But Ross, there are plenty of stories around these two very, very different teams. And the last time these two teams met, it was the start of the Tyler Shough era. So what is the biggest story going on there with the New Orleans Saints heading into this matchup?
Yeah, kind of a continuation of that Week 8 matchup is a big part of what it is that you're going to be watching for New Orleans. I think the Saints are trying to figure out what their future looks like and who's a part of it. And so I don't know that the rest of the season's about wins and losses. In fact, I really think it might be more about losses than about wins, right? You're trying to hold on to maybe some of that premium draft capital. I'm not suggesting that the Saints would tank. I don't believe that the NFL tanks. I don't think that that's a thing for most teams, especially when you've got guys like Lovie Smith in this business that will actively coach against it. But I do think that, but I do think that for New Orleans, like throughout the rest of the season, wins aren't going to make anybody feel better about how the team is doing, and losses can't make anybody feel worse about how they're doing. And so the rest of it now is the individual player development and seeing kind of how these guys, including, as you mentioned, Tyler Shough, can he be the guy for 2026? And then does he prove during 2026 that he can be the guy for the future? I think those are the kinds of things you're looking for as the season wraps up in New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of young talent on that team, but the Bucs went through all of this not that long ago. So, Bucs fans kind of remember, let's evaluate, let's see what we have in the pipeline before we move into free agency, before we move into the draft, see who's going to stay, who's going to go, who can actually contribute and help get this team back to the top of the division. And I mean, I don't know. I realize Saints fans at this point are like, we want better draft stock, but is anybody really going to be upset if they play spoiler and they help the Panthers by beating the Bucs this Sunday?
Nobody's going to be mad about that.
I think Saints fans will be pretty excited about that. And look, I mentioned on a New Orleans radio station at the beginning of the year that if I'm a Saints fan, I'm excited. I am excited about the future potential of this team. You have some really, really solid pieces, but now it's about finding the rest of that future core to really start to compete. I don't know if Shough is the guy. I mean, what are your thoughts on Shough so far? Because I'm kind of indifferent.
Yeah, so far he's the guy on the roster, and that means he's the guy, right? And I think really the situation for New Orleans is the best case scenario is that they feel good enough about Tyler Shough to give him 2026. And then you end up kind of figuring out, is he a franchise guy throughout that 2026 season? I would venture to say that not a lot of folks really knew of Drew Brees as the franchise guy until after he had his full season in 2006, before it was like, oh, all of a sudden, like, this is making a lot of sense. This could be the guy. And then I think 2007 solidified that when he went for over 4,000 passing yards. And so not that I'm expecting Tyler Shough to do that in 2026, but it's typically the process, right? You don't just figure that out in 1 year, or in Tyler Shuck's case, half a year. You have to kind of give this an entire season to get a look at it. So I think you'll get an opportunity to learn a little bit more about that in 26. So he's the guy in the building right now, which makes him the guy. And he's probably a better option than what the draft class has to offer, which is just a draft class that has become completely disappointing in terms of what we thought this draft class is going to be versus what it is. People are already saying, wait until 2027, just like they said, wait until 2026, just like they said, wait until 2025. Like, you know how this quarterback game goes in the draft. But I think it's the other pieces too, though, James. I think that it's Quincy Riley, the starting corner opposite Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think it's Jonas Sanker, the young safety. I think it's Kelvin Banks Jr., the rookie left tackle. I think it's Devon Vele, who just had a breakout game up against the Miami Dolphins, particularly strong second half in that game, and him coming up with 8 catches for 93 receiving yards, something folks have been waiting to see all season after the Saints traded a 4th and 7th round pick in the preseason to get him here to New Orleans. I think that it's those pieces and more as well, even down to the field goal kicker, an Northern Irish kicker, Charlie Smith for Mayo Bridge, coming in and getting his first opportunity last week and hitting the 3rd longest field goal, a debut field goal in a player's history and a kicker's history. And so I think that it's all of those things, man. Like it's the quarterback position, but you're also trying to figure out what do you have around that quarterback position so you know how to address that over the course of the offseason.
Yeah, and I also think it'll be interesting to see how Shuck can do if you give him a little bit more help. Olave isn't going to do it all on his own. Kamara, he's out of the lineup, and he's not who he once was. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out and what the Saints offseason looks like. The biggest storyline for the Bucs, though, is that they're getting healthier. And the offense is finally
just in time.
It's finally on the verge of looking the way it was intended to. So last week against the Cardinals, you get back Ben Bredesen. So now the offensive line is as healthy as it's going to be this season. Cody Mauch suffered a season-ending injury, but now finally you have 80% of your starters in their correct spots, moving forward the rest of the year. And then you get the return of Bucky Irving, who showed that he was just as electric as ever. But now the 21-day practice windows have opened up for Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan. McMillan, for those that don't know, he suffered a terrifying neck injury in preseason against the Steelers. Teddy threw a super high ball. McMillan went up and came down on his neck, was taken off the field. He's been in a neck brace, still made the catch though. That's the important thing. Incredible. But McMillan is able to start practicing again. And then Mike Evans, who broke that clavicle against the Detroit Lions on primetime, he is ahead of schedule. That practice window has opened for him. Now, I don't think either of those guys is suiting up Sunday against the Saints. Optimistically, I would say that there's a legitimate chance that Mike Evans plays against the Falcons next week. You'll probably get a couple of weeks out of Mike there as he's reintegrated into the offense. Then I've kind of penciled the Miami game in week 17 as the potential Jalen McMillan return. Give him a couple of games to integrate into the offense. And then finally, you could be heading into the postseason with an offense that has Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Emeka Egbuka, Jalen McMillan, Tez Johnson, and Bucky Irving. It doesn't matter that the defense stinks, Ross, if the offense has that many weapons and can put up 40.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a huge part. That's a big thing about, like, you're looking at on the opposite side here in New Orleans. So the defense is performing well, but the offense can't score points. And so I think people would much rather have the stinky defense with the really, really good offense. I mean, Saints fans lived through that for many years here in New Orleans, watching Drew Brees play across some really, really, really bad defenses here in the state of Louisiana. And so it's not a bad situation for them to be in. So, but what I'm hearing from your timeline that pertains to this game in particular is that Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan might not be back on the field this weekend, even though those 21-day practice windows have opened up, right?
Yeah, that's what I would say. Jalen McMillan has like no chance of playing. Yeah. Mike Evans, you never know.
See it, right?
If he's out there and he's feeling good, because he's been cleared, obviously, because that window is open. If he's out there, he's got his legs under him, he could go out there and play. I think it's unlikely. I would rather see him get through this week of practice than get a couple of more practices in before a Thursday night game. And with the injuries the Bucs have had, who knows if any of these receivers end up getting banged up. But give him that little extra time. All due respect, I don't think they need Mike Evans to win this game. Go ahead and just ease him back in and then get him ready for Atlanta, which is going to be I hate to say it, Kirk Cousins against Tampa is really good.
He's got a couple of those teams, man, where he just manages to show up.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to talk to Aaron next week during Kirk-sember is probably what he's going to call it. So yeah, I would say, going into this game, I would be shocked if Mike Evans or Jalen McMillan were activated and suited up to play on Sunday.
Good stuff.
All right, we are going to get into some of these key matchups. That is coming up next on a crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports. Bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes, it's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. And the new Stacks feature, well, it lets you choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup, like more on Baker Mayfield's passing yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Thank you again for making Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Ross, there are a couple of matchups that could make or break this game. Want to start with the visiting team. What's the first matchup you're looking at that could really, put the Bucs back up against a wall and create some excitement for not just Saints fans, but also Panthers fans?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is if the Saints offensive line can find any way at all to create some time for Tyler Shuck. You mentioned that the Bucs defense isn't at its strongest. They're one of the worst passing defenses in the league right now in terms of passing yards allowed. And so for the Saints who look to maybe have struck a rhythm a little bit with now multiple wide receivers and tight end Juwan Johnson, who can all kind of get in the mix here in the passing game with rookie quarterback Tyler Shuck. Buying him time, the quarterback, is going to be the most important part. And so you can go up against a really bad passing defense all you want, but if you can't keep your quarterback upright, or if you can't keep your quarterback in the pocket, or you're not allowing your quarterback to have the space in the interior to be able to step up in the pocket, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity there. And so I think for me, if the New Orleans Saints offensive line is finding a way to create a clean pocket, and you're not gonna keep Tyler Shuck clean the entire game, right? That's a really good defensive line there, particularly on the interior, and especially with Vita Vea, who just had another sack last week against the Cardinals. Like, you are gonna have trouble. But if you can minimize that trouble as much as possible and allow Tyler Shuck and these pass catchers to be able to take advantage of the weak passing defenses across from them, that to me would be the thing that would give the Saints fans and Panthers fans who are going to be watching to see if the Saints can play spoiler here, the most confidence going into, or rather, early on and throughout the matchup. And early on is really important. Saints have to start this fast as opposed to waiting until the second half to get going.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it is exactly what my defensive key is for the Bucs, and that is the pass rush against Tyler Shuck, because the defense was relentless against Shuck and Rattler in that Week 8 game. Against Shuck specifically, 2 sacks and interception held him to 56% completion percentage. Only threw for 128 yards, but I mean, it was a no-win situation for Shuck in that game. Like, he was kind of thrown to the wolves. But since then, he still had an issue turning the ball over. He's been sacked 12 times over the last 4 games. So you can get to him and force him to either go to the ground or force him into mistakes. And what you can't afford to do is let him have the kind of day he had against Carolina. 70+ completion percentage, no turnovers, managed that game beautifully to lead them to a big upset win. Now, for the Bucs, you mentioned the interior of the defensive line. Well, now you also have Hassan Reddick back, who did not play in that Week 8 game. And if you take a look at the pass rush that the Bucs had coming out of the bye against the Patriots, against the Bills, against the Rams, it was virtually non-existent. Then you look at what they did against the Cardinals. The pass rush looked far better than it has because of the threat of Reddick. Brissett, he was sacked twice last week. He took an intentional grounding to avoid another sack, had numerous throwaways because he was under pressure. And Reddick just adds that other dimension that offenses have to account for. And it really opens things up for Bowles to bring more of his exotic blitzes at any moment. And that creates problems for an offensive line that really struggles in protecting their quarterback. So the defense for the Bucs can set the tone early in this game. It'll just be a matter of not falling apart in the second half like they did last week.
Yeah. And context around that interception, he hit Chris Olave directly in the numbers, and then Antoine Winfield just wanted the ball more. And so I don't hold that one against Tyler Shuck as much, but under pressure, like we've still seen some things that maybe have, giving you some pause in terms of what the development of Tyler Shuck is looking like. But he has looked a lot better under pressure than I expected him to. I said the same thing about Spencer Rattler. Something about what Kellen Moore is doing works in that place. And they do get the ball out quickly, and he has been pushing the ball downfield. But to your point, like there's no denying it. The New Orleans Saints offensive line has been weak this season, and it's gotten weakened because of injuries as well. It hasn't gotten any better because of that. And then you look at the trading away of Trevor Penning. I don't know that really necessarily hurt them to lose Trevor Penning, but Dylan Ravens hasn't necessarily stepped up to provide better play so far. And so I think all of that in context, that matchup there, offensive line, defensive line, regardless of the context around the interception against the Bucs, you've seen more interceptions over the course of the past few games from Tyler Shuck as well. And so just finding ways to be able to kind of, get those things figured out and keep things clean, keep things comfortable, and allow them to be able to have like a cleaner attack, I think would go a long way. But that's a lot easier for me to say than it will be for them to do against that Bucs front.
Yeah, especially in a game where weather conditions are, as of right now, not looking great.
Right.
It's going to look like it could be a real nasty, sloppy kind of game. But Ross, when you take a look at the Saints defense going up against an offense that has Chris Godwin back now, has Bucky Irving back now, what's kind of the matchup that can make or break that side of the football?
Yeah, I think it's matching up with the wideouts. I know some of the top guys might not make their way back out onto the field, but I don't know if that necessarily matters. I think the Saints still have to be able to show that they can continue to do that. Now, I will say that the Saints are the 7th ranked passing defense in the NFL right now. And you might say, well, that's because they can't stop the run. And so everybody's been running against them. Well, they've had the 2nd most passing attempts against them over on the defensive side as well. So it's not a volume issue. They have been standing up to the passing defense or to passing offenses, but they just have to keep that going. In particular, I'm going to really be watching the matchup when Chris Godwin goes into the slot and matches up with Alontae Taylor. For me, that's going to be one of the key matchups in this game where, if one pass, you're gonna get yardage as a slot receiver, but can you minimize the yardage in terms of making tackles at the catch point, reducing yards after catch, and can you eliminate the explosive plays? That's easier. That's really, really hard to do up against a guy like Chris Godwin, regardless of how long he's been back. And so for me, that matchup right there, Alontae Taylor, Chris Godwin, but all together matching up with the wide receivers and pass catchers that Baker Mayfield's going to be distributing to, I think is going to be big for the Saints defense.
Yeah, and that plays exactly into what I'm looking for, and that is Baker against the New Orleans secondary. The week 8 game, the Bucs offense struggled when they probably shouldn't have. Luckily, the defense was able to pick him up. And then, of course, you had the officials take not 1, but 2 touchdowns away from Antoine Winfield Jr. Not that I'm still bitter. I'm more upset for Antoine as a person than I am for that game in particular. But anyway.
No, it was 23-3 instead of 30-3. My goodness.
Like I said, but when you're putting together like all pro resumes and Pro Bowl
I hear you. I'm just making fun.
2 touchdowns taken away. That was brutal. It was
rough. That's rough.
But if you go back, this was also the first game where Baker was really not playing like himself. This was kind of
very surprised by that.
The downtick. He missed open receivers. He was sailing passes. His timings was off, and that trend would obviously go on to continue. But this time around, I think the Bucs do need to attack the Saints secondary, and they need to do it relentlessly. You mentioned that the Saints are 7th in pass defense, but they're also 25th in completion percentage allowed, 25th in pass yards per attempt allowed, 25th in passer rating allowed, 24th in touchdown to interception ratio allowed. So you can throw against this team, and we saw Baker make some great throws last week, and he was a couple of drops away from having a huge day. Some bad drops by his receivers. Ibuka in the first meeting, 3 catches on 9 targets. That's not good enough. Godwin didn't play in that game, but now Godwin had a huge performance, minus the drop in the end zone against Arizona. Ibuka's looking for a little bit of redemption after some bad drops since coming out of the bye. So there are going to be a lot of opportunities for Baker to push the ball down the field. And then you have the threat of Bucky Irving in the backfield as well. That's going to keep the Saints defense guessing a little bit as to what the offense is going to be able to do. But Baker should be able to throw the ball in this one about 30 times and have a huge performance.
Yeah. And that's going to be big. It's going to be big. And I think that a big part of that too, just to add to sort of the, you have that symbiotic nature between coverage and pass rush. Since he got back into the lineup, Chase Young's been excellent. And since Chase Young got back into the lineup, the Saints passing defense is top 5. And a big part of it is because of how well the pass rush works with him. They're not a high pressure defense, James, but they're a high pressure to sack conversion defense. So when they do get pressure, they tend to get home and make the play. And thanks to Chase Young and really Cam Jordan, who has 6.5 sacks all of a sudden this season, and he's leading the team. It's remarkable. He made himself a good $600,000 just last week, getting 2 sacks in Miami. But those guys have also made it a point to get after the football. And we saw that in the last meeting between these two teams as well. It didn't amount to much for New Orleans, but we saw them going after the football when they were getting into the backfield and getting to Baker Mayfield. I would expect that trend to continue and for them to continue to be aggressive and trying to get that ball back to their offense.
Yeah, I do remember Chase Young getting the better of Tristan Wirfs in the first go around, and that is not something that happens often. So Chase Young absolutely playing some great ball. Glad Ben Bredesen is back to help that interior. When he's going to have to go up against Cam Jordan. All right, what do these teams have to do to get a win on Sunday? That is coming up next on today's episodes of Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on a crossover Thursday. And Ross, you already mentioned it. The Saints aren't exactly looking for wins. They're not tanking, but they're not, they're not in the hunt. They're not in the playoff race anymore. So it's more about the future than it is the present. All that said, a win in Ray J would probably put smiles on a lot of faces. So what do these Saints need to do in order to win this game?
Yeah, I think they have to force. I think it's 2 things for me. You got to force uncharacteristic play from the Bucs. They did a pretty good job of that in the Week 8 meeting. They just weren't able to take advantage of that. You mentioned that Bucs offense and Baker Mayfield struggled, maybe in a game where they shouldn't have. But the Saints helped to force that and create that environment and create that situation where that happened. And so you need to do that again, right? Baker Mayfield, up to a certain point this year, was a clear MVP candidate. And then has kind of hit this midseason slump. And look, all the injuries around him certainly factored in that. He had an injury himself that factored into that. And so what he's capable of, though, is really the most important thing to me. It's not that, he hit, I don't want to say a slump, but he had a downturn at some point during the season. That doesn't mean that you should take it lightly. You should be focused on the fact that what he's capable of doing. Don't let him get back to that. So you have to force the sort of uncharacteristic play out of the Bucs offense. And then I think you need to, as a team, translate what you did in the second half against Miami to the first half against Tampa. I asked Kellen Moore about this directly on Monday during his day after press conference. How do you take a second half performance and then a week later make that carry that momentum to your first half performance? And he basically outlined look, there's a lot of mental tricks. There's a lot of you were having to really coach them differently, coach them better. He took a lot of accountability on it. And so I'll be very curious to see if they're able to achieve that, because I don't know how you do that. I don't understand how you consistently go from starting slow. This is a team that has 19 first quarter points all season, worst in the NFL in that metric. They've never scored more than 7 points in a quarter, and they only did that once. And so how do you take that trend of a season and then all of a sudden turn that on its face in week 14? I'm not super convinced you can do it, but if the Saints are going to get a win, that is what they'll have to do. And if they did do that, that would be a big time shout out to a fantastic coaching job well done here towards the end of the season, which would be another good sign for New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about building for the future, right? So if you can start to get that, going towards the end, you're going to know, okay, this is the recipe. This is the way that we can handle these things so that next year we know how to get, these guys to start fast and to continue to push. So yeah, the Bucs, for the most part this season, they've allowed teams to start off really fast, which has led to some problems throughout the year. For Tampa, in order to win this one, first on offense, you can't have the self-inflicted wounds. That's really what has hurt you more often than not. It's been the drops by, Ibuka and Tez and Shep. But the most glaring, obviously, is Ibuka. This was a guy that was the far and away front runner for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he has just cratered. Part of that is, of course, the play around him. It's been the play of Baker Mayfield. It's been the play of the offensive line. All those things factor into it. But now you're looking at Tetero and McMillan as being the favorite because Ibuka has not been himself. Getting those opportunities like he had last week against the Cardinals for a big third down conversion to get them into field goal range, hitting him in the hands and falling to the ground, you can't have that. You cannot allow a team like the Saints to stick around in this game. You have to put the pedal to the metal and just keep it there. So stop with the dropped passes. Again, another, Chris Godwin, he's another one that never drops passes. When Tom Brady says that guy has the best hands he's ever thrown to, probably shouldn't drop passes that hit you right in the hands there. But then the penalties. They had 2 touchdowns on one drive negated by penalty. Now, of course, Tristan Wirfs ended up scoring a touchdown there, and that up. So watch out for Tristan Wirfs. He had more touchdowns in November than Jamar Chase. So look out for that. But you cannot hurt yourself. And then defensively, it's exactly what you did in week 8. It is being opportunistic and capitalizing off of those opportunities. It's getting to Shuck, getting him on the ground, forcing him into mistakes, speeding up the internal clock, getting those happy feet going, and really creating a sense of panic there in the pocket so that guys like Antoine and Tyke and Jamel Dean can take the ball away.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. And that's going to be kind of the crux of this matchup is who's going to make the most plays. That's often the situation for any game, of course. But I think in this one, like, this is one of those ones that's either a slog to 20 or it's a sprint to 40. And we'll see which one ends up being the case. I think it's going to be more so a slog to 20 based upon like both of these teams scoring metrics so far this year and the situations they're in presently going into this week. But yeah, I think, if one of these teams turns it on and all of a sudden starts scoring points, obviously that's going to be a big time shift for what this or big time piece of what will dictate what this matchup looks like by the end.
Yeah, and again, with the potential for a monsoon at kickoff.
Yeah, right. I keep forgetting about that.
Well be.
It's very much going to be that slog to 20.
It might be a slog to 10, but it's going to be good old-fashioned, muddy, dirty, sloppy football that I grew up on, and I am here for it. Like I told Evan Klosky on my Tuesday episode, at least it's not the 4 inches of snow that I got overnight. So you're not going to have to deal with snow in Tampa, but the rain is going to make it interesting. All right, Ross, the Bucs are 8.5-point favorites in this one. I'm not sure if they can cover 8.5, but which way do you see this game going?
Yeah, I see this going Tampa's way. I was going Tampa and the points 26-17, but I'm going to back my scoring projection off because I didn't take into account the weather situation. And I might take this down to like a 10-14 win for Tampa. And that it's a bit of, like we said, that slog. And it's going to look a lot closer than it actually feels. But I think the weather is going to have a pretty big impact here. So I'm thinking maybe 17-10, 14-10 in favor of the Bucs, and then kind of see where things go from there.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to have a score prediction until my Friday episode. That's usually when I do mine. But I feel like this is going to be a Bucs win, but a Saints cover just because of kind of all the things we've laid out here. Now, the Saints in week 8 was one of 2 times the Bucs have won by double digits this year.
Right.
But you take into account, the weather and kind of the ups and downs here. And it's a divisional game. And the Saints, I truly believe in my heart of hearts, they want to go out there and try to be the reason the Bucs don't win the NFC South. They couldn't stop Mike from his 1,000 last year, stop him from making the playoffs this year. That might help.
And those Ray J games between these two teams specifically are always weird.
Yeah, they really, really are. But, the Bucs control their own destiny. They win the next 3 games, they win the division. So the Saints can really create some problems in this one. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be an interesting one for sure. But, yeah, I lean Bucs win, Saints cover. So that is going to do it for our crossover Thursday episodes of Locked On Saints and Locked On Bucs. Please make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcast to both of these shows. Ross and I will be back on Friday for our final game previews. And until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you so much for joining us here on a crossover Thursday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.